The briefing is brought to you in association with Spain. From the wilds of the Atlantic to the warmth of Mediterranean isles, the Spanish coast has something for every occasion. And whether chartering a yacht or renting a more modest motorboat, there's no better way to explore this magical country's lesser-known highlights than from the open water. Listen out for a new summer season of The Concierge on Monocle Radio. Join Robert Bound and friends as they turn navigator for an unforgettable journey along the Spanish coast. From hidden gems to legendary gastronomy, and with the unique drama of the America's Cup in the host city of Barcelona added to the mix, discover why the time is right to take to the waves. The Concierge, returning to Monocle Radio in July. This summer, set sail for Spain.
You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 9th of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Guy Delaunay. Coming up on today's programme, Thailand's main opposition party bounces back just 2 days after its court-ordered dissolution. So, how will move forward? We'll be discussing the options for the all-new, but not really, People's Party. After that...
Українці вміють досягати своїх цілей, і це не ми вибрали досягати цілей у війні.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia should feel what it has done as he comments on the incursions by Ukrainian troops into Russia. We'll speak to Monocle's reporter on the ground in Kiev. Germany's pivot from China means a push for profits across the Atlantic as the US becomes its biggest trading partner. But how healthy is Europe's largest economy? And finally...
Last night I was sketching the France-Germany basketball game, and... I've never seen such a physical basketball game. And the drawing I did is these two players pushing against each shoulder, both driving, fighting one another. I mean, there's such drama in this.
Our Paris Olympics team speaks to the Disney animator Glen Keane. All that, plus a check-in at Copenhagen Fashion Week, right here on The Briefing with me, Guy Delaunay. You can't keep a good party down. That's the view of Thailand's largest opposition movement. A court order dissolved the Move Forward party on Wednesday, but they're looking awfully solid today, as the only thing which seems to have changed is the name. They're now known as the People's Party. Meanwhile, the country's Prime Minister, Srettha Thavisin, has got problems of his own. He's trying to rebuff an attempt by the military Royalist Alliance to remove him from office. Joining us now is Monocle's Asia editor, James Chambers, who's based in Bangkok. James, first of all, is it a case of meet the new party, same as the old party?
It is very much. We're looking at the same individuals. I mean, they're using the same colour. They're still going to be the Orange Party. If you look at their logo, it's remarkably similar to Move Forward, and that was remarkably similar to the first iteration, which was Future Forward. I guess, as you said, it's called the People's Party now, and the only disappointment here is it's not another iteration of Forward. And we're all guessing on what word they would use to go along with Forward. But it's the People's Party in English. Of course, the Thai names are completely different, and they've got a new leadership. But most of the members of Parliament that did belong to the Move Forward Party have now shuffled across to the People's Party, minus the 10 or so executives that were given a 10-year ban from politics, and that includes the charismatic former leader Peter Limjaroenrat, who's now basically being benched for the next decade.
Just remind us, what was the pretext by the court for the dissolution of Move Forward?
Well, one of the major pillars of their campaign in last year's election was to reform Thailand's infamous lèse-majesté laws, which is Section 112 of the Criminal Code. That's what they campaigned on, and there was basically a petition against them to say that the act of doing that was trying to basically bring down the monarchy. And the Constitutional Court ruled on Wednesday that was indeed the case. And under the Constitution, that was deemed illegal and they were dissolved.
I've just thought of what we could have called them. Keep on moving might have been quite good. We could have had a sort of soul-to-soul sort of element in there. I'll keep thinking of these as we carry on talking, James. But, bearing in mind the People's Party says it'll continue its campaign to axe these lèse-majesté laws, it doesn't seem like we're going to see an end to this conflict between them and, the people who proclaim themselves to be royalists. And, of course, we never know what the royal family is thinking of all of this because they don't say anything.
I mean, that's today on Friday was the big coming out party. That was when the People's Party had announced their new name, their new leader, a young guy called Matapong Lueng Panyawut. He's a 37-year-old kind of tech whiz. He had his own startup for 10 years, and then he went into politics. He's kind of fits the bill for the move forward. They're all kind of, a lot of them are from the kind of Bangkok liberal elite. But he's going to be the new face, and I was very surprised to hear him confirm that they're not going to change their approach. They are going to still advocate for changing Section 112, but they're not going to be, in his words, careless. So in a sense, the Future Forward, Move Forward, People's Party, they're kind of learning by doing. It was all very new when it started in 2019. They did a lot of things wrong. They were very careless. And the first iteration got dissolved, and the second one is being dissolved for something else. And they're going to look at that Constitutional Court ruling on Wednesday and see what they can say. Because the way they interpret it, the court hasn't outlawed the idea that Section 112 can be reformed. You just need to be very careful about how you go about doing it. I thought they would be a bit more careful, right now, and perhaps wait a bit. But actually, they've come out and said that nothing's going to change. It's just going to be more careful about it.
Now, I spent 8 years in Cambodia, and during that time spent various periods based in Bangkok, working there, travelling through Bangkok many times. And you and I both know that journalists have to be very careful about what they say about these sort of things, let alone the politicians who are campaigning against this lèse-majesté clause. How difficult does it make for people to actually report on what's going on?
Well, it is. I mean, it's something that's been around for a long time, and ironically, it's a tool that's used to silence people, and it's a tool that's been used to essentially dissolve, move forward. So it's not something that's going away. But I guess people are reading into the last year's election result, which saw Move Forward come to power, that there is an appetite for reform, and the young generation in Thailand do want to do things a bit differently. So even though Move Forward has been dissolved, I think everyone, as you said at the start, is very optimistic. I guess the figurehead behind the whole movement, a guy called Thanathorn Juanrongkit, who we've interviewed before in Monocle, his response was just shrug it off and move on. And he's very much in the driving seat. The leader now is very much seen as his man, and he's the guy also bankrolling it because he comes from a wealthy automotive company, and he's very much just going to push on with this progressive agenda and aim for the 2027 election. So I think the difference between now and when the Future Forward Party was dissolved, that prompted a lot of protests in Thailand, and there's some nasty clashes in 2020 and 2021. I think that we'll see a different tactic this time around, and I think there's more confidence that actually the future is with these people and with this party, and everyone just needs to be a bit more patient. So they'll be looking ahead now and planning for 2027 and seeing if they can actually win the majority they need to be in government and to get their person elected Prime Minister. Bearing
in mind that the Pheu Thai party of Prime Minister Srettha is also opposed to the royalist establishment, has long-time connections with Thaksin Shinawatra, what is it that separates them from the People's Party? What are the differences between these two particular movements, and why are they at loggerheads when they might not be more sort of natural allies?
I guess the truth is, Move Forward or the People's Party are the future. Partai were the past, and they're essentially competing for the same people. Partai actually, they've went through what Move Forward or the People's Party are going through now. When Thaksin came to power, he was this breath of fresh air. He was this guy who was going to change Thailand, and he did over a few years. But his first party was dissolved. Then his brother-in-law came back as prime minister. Then his sister, and there was coup after coup, and each party got dissolved. And essentially, at the end of the day, they got co-opted. They got co-opted by the conservative elite, and now they're in a kind of a power sharing arrangement with the conservatives, leading Thailand. But they're nowhere near as popular as they once were, and the feeling is, by the next election, they might actually be wiped out. So they're very much an endangered species. And when it comes to the kind of progressive, opposition, the kind of pro-democracy party, that is very much the People's Party. And actually, the PM, Seta Thavisin, and Thaksin himself both have two big court cases coming up themselves. The PM next week will find out if he's still allowed to continue in his job, and the week after, Thaksin has his own lèse majesté case to answer. The feeling here is that I guess the Prime Minister, if you put your money on it, he will stay in a job, and Thaksin won't. He will essentially be let off, but they're being used as kind of warnings to keep them in check. So at the moment, you could say that the conservative side of politics is having a moment in the short term. But when we look towards the next election, I think the momentum is definitely with the People's Party.
Well, our time has dissolved, James, but I think you've brought us beautifully up to date. That's Monocle's Asia editor, James Chambers. Now here's Henry Rees-Sheridan with the day's other news headlines.
Thank you, Guy. The former Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont has evaded a massive police manhunt and fled Spain back to Belgium, where he lives, his party has said. Spanish authorities launched a search for Mr. Puigdemont yesterday after he made a shock return to Spain, gave a short speech to crowds in Barcelona and then disappeared. He's wanted on charges linked to a failed bid for Catalan independence in 2017. The United States, Egypt and Qatar have released a joint statement calling on Israel and Hamas to resume negotiations over a ceasefire and hostage release deal. Israel said it would send negotiators to the proposed talks, which are scheduled to take place on the 15th of August in Doha or Cairo. Hamas did not immediately respond. The renewed diplomatic push will be seen as an attempt to stop regional tensions from escalating after Hamas's leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated last week. Iran, blaming Israel, has vowed a response. And Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, has confirmed that he will be based in the plane maker's birthplace of Seattle, moving closer to the factory floor instead of Boeing's corporate headquarters in Washington, D.C. Ortberg, an aerospace industry veteran with an engineering background and a Boeing outsider, took the reins yesterday with the mandate of addressing a safety and manufacturing crisis months after missing bolts led to a door plug falling off a 737 MAX jet in mid-air. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Guy.
Thank you very much, Henry. Let's now have a look at what's going on in Ukraine. Joining us now is Monocle writer and researcher Julia Lassica, who's in Kiev this week. Welcome to the briefing, Julia. First of all, we heard at the top of the programme Volodymyr Zelensky speaking. I couldn't follow the Ukrainian, but I imagine that you probably can. He's talking about this need for Russia, as he puts it, to feel the consequences of war. What does he mean by that?
Hi, Guy. Thanks so much for having me. I guess he's echoing a sentiment that many Ukrainians feel, which is that depending on where you live in the country, but, wherever you are, you feel the consequences of Russia's war against you. You can hear the shelling. You are probably affected it by yourself directly, or at least have family members who are on the front lines fighting. And part of the reason that Ukrainians feel so much frustration towards Russians is that they don't understand the reality of this war that is going on. And so when this war comes to them, Ukrainians are sort of hopeful that Russians will wake up a little bit more to the consequences of what they have unleashed on their neighbour.
What would you say people are feeling? I know you say that, they were frustrated perhaps that ordinary Russians weren't understanding what war means perhaps, but people must be apprehensive as well, that if you're going to push into Russian territory, what's going to come back as a consequence?
I think that isn't really the feeling. I think that people aren't apprehensive about what will come back, because as we see, when Ukraine does push at Russia and does, push at Russia's limits that Russia lays down, actually, there aren't that many consequences at all. I mean, we can see that in the Black Sea region, Russia was sort of so keen to dominate the sea. Ukraine doesn't even have a navy, and yet somehow Ukraine is continuing to ship out its grain. It's managed to drive out Russia's navy, and there has been no sort of catastrophic response. And in the same thing we're seeing here with Kursk, Ukraine is, it seems now very clear that Ukraine is actually launching, something that looks very much like a sort of invasion into the Kursk region in Russia. And there has been no catastrophic response so far. I think what Ukrainians are feeling apprehensive about, though, is that these men and women who are going into the Kursk region, they are their relatives, their brothers, mothers, fathers, etc. And so they're very worried about the fate of these soldiers who are going in. They're very worried about what will happen to them. I think that's the kind of fear that is enveloping people right now.
And does that mean a wider drive towards mobilization and recruitment for the military in Ukraine?
No, I think that that's a really tricky conversation that is being had by all Ukrainians at the moment, especially Ukrainian men. It's a really difficult time. We've talked about this before on Monocle Radio, but the idea is that, there is a very serious lack of troops now. Ukrainians are massively outmanned by the Russians. And that euphoric drive that was felt in Ukraine at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, when many men went to sign up to join the army, and women, that has faded. And now people are much more realistic. They have seen their friends and their family. They have seen the effects of the war that have happened to them, mistreatment in the army, unfortunately, in the Ukrainian army. And so people are much more cautious, and they're much less likely to go and sign up. It's a much trickier process. The Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian elements in the Ukrainian army, they have to win back trust from Ukrainian society to enable people to want to go and mobilize like they did in the first few days of the full-scale invasion.
Now, I happen to know you're joining us today from the Lavra Cultural Complex in Kiev, and that puts me in mind of what Haris Pashovich once told me about the theatre festival in Sarajevo during the siege there in the 1990s. And he said that people said to him, why a theatre festival during the war? And his response to that was, why a war during the theatre festival? So presumably culture does continue in Kiev, whatever's going on the front line.
Yeah, absolutely. Ukrainians have to exist. What Russia is trying to do at the moment is they're trying to destroy Ukraine, and that means to destroy Ukrainian life. But Ukrainian life must continue, and that's part of the resilience. And it's also part of Ukraine's diplomatic presence in the world. Ukraine has to show the richness of its culture, the richness of its, culinary scene, of its restaurants and cafes and bars. This has to be kind of an essential element of Ukraine showing to the rest of the world, showing to their European neighbors that we are as much, developed as you, and we have this culture that must be saved. It's part of the kind of soft power diplomacy of how do Ukrainians convince people that their country also deserves to exist and has so much to offer to the rest of the world. But yeah, I'm here in the Lavra. This is an ancient monastery complex. There are many museums on the grounds here, and it's this just beautiful oasis of kind of whitewashed walls, green domes with beautiful gold stars on them in the very, very center of Kyiv. And it's just wonderful here. I was taken around the churches by the directors here, and we talked about their plans for the future, different museums that they want to partner with, how they want to bring Ukrainian collections of, Scythian gold, for example, which is from, before, from the kind of contemporary with the ancient Greeks. And they want to bring this to museum collections around the world just to show how much Ukraine has to offer.
Well, thanks for joining us, Julia. That's Julia Lasika in Kiev. And you're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It's just coming up to 12:19 in the afternoon here in London. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio with me, Guy Delaunay. Now, business types would be forgiven for whistling the Star-Spangled Banner in Berlin today. That's because the latest figures indicate that the US is now Germany's biggest trading partner. It apparently completes Germany's much trumpeted pivot away from China, but it seems to have come at a cost, with June's exports overall down 3.4% compared to May. Well, Karsten Brzeski is the global head of macro at ING Research, and he joins us now. Welcome to The Briefing, Karsten. Now, is this delight in Berlin or food for thought?
Well, thanks for having me. It is food for thought. On the one hand, it shows that German exports have indeed diversified, and that there is less export going to China, which in the past used to be the largest trading partner, and that is really due to active diversification, but also to China simply being able to produce the same goods that Germany normally produce, and they need Germany less than in the past. The strong position of the U.S. I think also shows the strength of the U.S. economy, at least up to the summer. It also shows that Germany clearly benefited from things like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. But at the same time, like you mentioned, German exports as a whole are not doing extremely well. So it is a bit a blessing in disguise.
When we're talking about China not needing Germany anymore, we were chatting in the office about this, and I remember being in China in the 90s on many occasions and seeing how all the Western companies were setting up joint ventures because they had to with Chinese companies. And I was thinking at the time, gosh, the danger here is for an awful lot of IP transfer, so inadvertent intellectual property transfer from the West to China. Is that what we're now seeing the consequences of?
Indeed, and I fully agree with you. Somehow everyone could see it coming except for the business leaders. Or maybe there was no alternative. That could also be, because of course, like you rightly said, well, in the 90s, but especially in the 2000s, after China had joined the World Trade Organization, this was the place to be. It was an enormous export destination, and especially Germany benefited a lot from it, because what did China need? China needed investment goods, machinery, cars, everything that Germany produced. So there was clearly, and also there was a naivety thinking that this could last forever, because like you rightly said, it was joint ventures, and these joint ventures indeed ended up with Chinese companies having the same intellectual properties, the same skills, but then maybe more efficiently, cheaper, or what have you. And then in some cases, like for example, look at electric vehicles now, China actually surpassed German quality. And then this is what's happening now. So China has really become the better Germany in terms of its industry structure. And this also means that China simply needs less goods out of Germany.
Yeah, because I remember the car you always used to see everywhere in China was the Shanghai Santana, which was a Volkswagen or part of a Volkswagen JV. I presume that Volkswagen's JV partner have gone off and done bigger and better things.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And especially in terms of EVs, there had also been a lot of subsidies over the last 5 years. So the Chinese government actively supported the electric vehicle industry, and that's what often happens. First there is a joint venture. First, the small partner learns from the big and experienced partner, and if they are doing it extremely well, they simply pass the elderly. If the elderly or the more experienced one is not keeping up, is not continuing to invest, is not keeping up with innovation, and that is exactly what we're currently seeing. So. To some extent, Germany has lost the race with China, because China has been doing what actually Germany always wanted to do. China is now really in certain industrial sectors a global leader, and Germany has unfortunately slightly fallen behind.
This is where you're going to cheer us all up by saying that, cheer Germany's business leaders up by saying, but actually these new markets that Germany's managing to open up with the US and perhaps other business partners, now these are higher added value and therefore much better for them than the Chinese market. And it's just a case of a little blip here until we get all of those things on stream after our pivot, right?
Oh, well, I wish I had read that script. It's unfortunately it's unfortunately not that easy. What we're really seeing, we're seeing that there is a more fragmented trade world out there. Is more trade tension, and who knows what's going to happen after the U.S. presidential elections, and maybe we're going to have also more trade tensions between the U.S. and Europe. In the year 2025. So, the big hope now that many German manufacturers have is India, and indeed big population, strong economic growth. So this could be the next place to be. But there's always this joke in Germany. Well, at some point in time we need to see life on the moon or on Mars in order to find new places where Germany can export to. So the problem is there will be simply limits to this German export engine, which means Germany will have to do more domestic demand. Germany has to do more investment in its own domestic economy. The green transition can clearly be, in order to cheer you up a little bit, the green transition could be a vehicle to at least increase and improve German industry, and could then also become maybe a new product for the export machinery. But that is something we're not seeing yet. So we still have to go through this period of what I always call a combination of both cyclical and structural headwind, or simply call this a longer structural transition, in order for Germany to wake up that there is a new economic world out there.
Food for thought for lunch today, Carsten, I think. That was the economist Carsten Berzeski, and you're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And thank you for listening to Monocle Radio, in particular The Briefing with me, Guy Delaunay. Now, as a fan of Day Berger and Mikkelsen shirts, which are unfortunately no longer made for men, I'm gagging to know what's on the catwalk at Copenhagen Fashion Week. And handily enough, Monocle's Grace Charlton is there and can tell us what's on trend in the Danish capital. So what is on trend, Grace, in Copenhagen Fashion Week at the moment?
I mean, it's Scandinavia, so there's a lot of neutral palettes, lots of minimalism, but also, some fun patterns every now and again. Copenhagen's really emerged as a center for fashion in a way that's maybe a little bit more playful than other cities. No Mikkelsen shirts though.
Yeah, it's a rotten thing to happen. I used to rather enjoy those. They were very playful, very lovely. I've still got one or two of them because I tend to look after these sort of things. And I thought, gosh, I wonder what they're doing now. And the answer is not menswear. Have we got any interesting menswear out there, or is the catwalk all women's wear at the Fashion Week?
No, it's a nice mix. They don't have separate ones, so they were all sort of doing it together. And I think that is maybe another strength of Copenhagen Fashion Week, is they're sort of making their own rules. They're not, as codified as somewhere like Milan or Paris. You'll find new inspiration for your wardrobe if you have a look at what's coming out of Copenhagen Fashion Week.
We know that every different fashion week, Grace, has a different kind of atmosphere. And, there's one thing, Paris and Milan, London's got a different vibe altogether. What would you say is the sort of overriding vibe that you've got in Copenhagen? How do people go about their fashion business there? I
mean, it's really commercial, which I think is interesting. Maybe that's a reflection of the industry. It's not necessarily about crazy craft and crazy silhouettes. It's very... just commercially viable, just wearable clothes,
Wearable clothes. I mean, what a novelty that is. And
in the fashion world, it can be.
Indeed, it can. And so if I can't get any Day Mikkelsen and Berger anymore, what are the brands that you've been taking a particular interest in at this Fashion Week?
So one interesting one is Mark Henley Domino Tan. He's a Danish designer, but it's now his brand. He stepped away from it, and there's a new creative director who's taken it over. And her collection was really stunning, just beautiful, crafted, hay accessories, straw, really inspired by the Danish countryside. So that was beautiful. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, I went to this Brutalist Stadium on the outskirts of Copenhagen, where Baum and Garden did this show on an athletic track, to the sounds of Depeche Mode, and it was a riot, and everyone was sort of beer fueled a little bit, like an actual football match. And the clothes were like inspired by the 80s and power dressing, but also the Olympics. So that was a sort of fun, little spectrum to sample.
Ironically, given the link to the Olympics, that sounds very not Paris in terms of its attitudes there, Grace. Also interesting to note that in the notes that you've sent over, you're talking about the colours, which are the palette, which is being deployed by a lot of people in Copenhagen Fashion Week. And I'm going to challenge you on this. Cream, buttermilk, eggshell and bone, ivory, pearl and alabaster. OK, what's the difference?
I know, well, that's the whole point, but really you'll be surprised at how one shade of slightly off-white can dominate.
Oh, you say ecru, I say, latte. I mean...
Exactly.
How are they deploying these different shades? And is anybody daring to deploy the different shades in one garment? That's what I'd like to know.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I don't know if we can cross over the neutrals that much because it would just be so, jarring. No, they're deploying them in very tasteful ways, obviously. But every now and again, but it's funny because every collection starts with like beige, 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 beige. And then maybe there'll be like a little bit of green and then an all black outfit. And then it's back to beige. So that's how it's being deployed. But it's a nice like palette cleansing sort of experience.
I mean, when you say it's wearable stuff, tell me it's not normcore, please.
No, it's not. No, please. It's like Scandi minimalism chic, No, don't worry. It's not for the everyday person. It's more for the clued into the shirt dresses sort of person.
So bearing in mind what you've been describing in terms of your own personal Jesus and all the rest of it, do you think that other fashion weeks could take some things on from Copenhagen and maybe deploy them themselves, or are they too stuck in their own ways?
Maybe. I mean, Copenhagen's really applauded for their more sustainable approach and like using more dead stock and whatnot. But I think the beauty of fashion weeks around the world is that they have their own personal, flavor. So I don't know if I really want to say like Paris should be like Copenhagen or Copenhagen should be like Paris, because then what's the point of visiting different cities?
Indeed, quite so. Thanks very much for joining us, Grace. That's Monocle's Grace Charlton, and this is The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, we'll head over to Paris after all that, because our team there have been in the French capital all week, covering the Olympics and everything around them. And this latest guest of theirs can boast both a connection to basketball and a presence in tens of millions of households around the world. He's Disney animator Glen Keane, the man behind the characters in films including The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin and Pocahontas, to name just a few. And of course, there was his collaboration with Kobe Bryant, Dear Basketball, and that is his connection to some of the stars at the games. Glenn took the time for a chat with Monocle's Emma Nelson.
Just being here for the games has been like a feast for an artist's eye. Everywhere I go, I bring my sketchbook.
Have you got it with you this morning?
I do.
And so it's a feast for an artist. I mean, what is it that you see that we don't?
Movement, desire. I was taught by my mentor, Ollie Johnston, who, with Walt Disney, they created the look of Disney animation. And he would say, he was an old guy when he was teaching me, Glenn, don't draw what the character is doing. Draw what they're thinking and feeling. And I think that's what I try to capture when I'm drawing. When I was working on Dear Basketball with Kobe, I said, Kobe, for one thing, you've got the worst basketball player on earth animating you. And he says, well, that's good, because everything you're going to learn about basketball is going to be studying him. And I said, yeah, you're right. But look, I've downloaded your top 20 plays, and I need you to tell me what you were thinking and feeling in each one of these moments for me to understand how to animate you. And he's just had this photographic memory of every feeling and stories, and it was incredible. So when I'm sitting, like last night, I was sketching the France-Germany basketball game, and I mean, I've never seen such a physical basketball game. I mean, and the drawing I did is these two players pushing against each shoulder, both driving, fighting one another. I mean, there's such drama in this. I mean, as an animator, you're a storyteller, but you do that in your drawing.
And what's interesting there is actually the slight disadvantage of radio is that we could not see that when you were describing the France-Germany basketball match, your body actually took the form of a visceral fighting man. It was astonishing to see. What I quite want to do is take you back. When you see Dear Basketball, this utterly beautiful short film about what drives Kobe Bryant, you illustrate at the top that this little boy who's on his bed and he's using his rolled up socks for a ball, and that's what lights his fire. What's Glen Keane's rolled up socks moment?
Well, I never remember anything other than wanting to be an artist. I mean, that was what I'd always desired. My dad was a cartoonist. But I knew somehow I wasn't going to be a cartoonist like him. I wanted to be a fine artist. Because one day my dad, when I was like about 7 years old, he said, "Glenn, I'm a cartoonist. You're an artist." And it was like being knighted. He gave me a book on dynamic anatomy, and I started drawing the Olympic athletes in that were like the sculptures from Greece. And I was doing these drawings of a discus thrower and a javelin and a sprinter. And I remember getting on the school bus, and I had my sketchbook with me. And all my friends gathered around and were looking at my sketches, and they started laughing. And they said, "Hey, Keane's drawing naked guys." And, at that age, when your friends laugh at what you do, you stop doing it. But because my dad had said, "Glenn, you're an artist," it was like, I realized they don't get it. I'm special. I like being an artist. And it just fueled my path. I mean, that was my rolled up socks moment for me.
How much of what you have just described to us is playing out now at the Olympics, where you see athletes with the javelin, with the discus, that moment when the body is at its most extreme and it's most, or arguably its most beautiful?
I think that there's something inside of the human spirit that animates the body. I mean, an animator is somebody who is animating what is inside and is coming out. And the body does impossible, incredible things. I think the key to anything you do is thinking like a child. You just never stop that. Successful athletes, I believe, still think like a child. Children believe that the impossible is possible. And there's nothing better at the end of a game when there is no time left and you still see the fire in the eyes, like, we're not going to give up. I mean, this is the spirit of a child living in an athlete. And I saw that with Kobe. I saw that in the team last night watching that. It's so thrilling.
And how much of that thinking like a child was stitched through your work at Disney? The fact remains is that you were creating beautiful films and beautiful characters essentially for children, although we all know that quite a few more people watch it. But how much every day did you have to say, "I'm getting up, I have to think like a child, I have to think like a child"?
No, I don't ever think that. It's just the way I am. I mean, you become the character that you animate. Ariel, for example, I created designing and animating her. I was 33 years old, and I remember animating Ariel singing this song, "Part of Your World," as she's swimming up, and she's starting to reach for the land. And I thought, this is embarrassing. I'm a 16-year-old mermaid right now, and I'm animating
incredibly pretty 16-year-old mermaid as well.
And I thought, oh gosh, what are people going to think of me? But I couldn't stop Ariel. She swam up and she reached out, and as she's singing "Part of Your World," she drifts back down to the bottom of the sea, and And it's just desire. So I animated it. And years later, I was speaking at an animation school, and this young woman comes up to me and said, Mr. Keane, I don't know if you remember this. There's this moment in Little Mermaid where Ariel reaches out. And I said, oh, yeah, no, I remember that. She said, well, I was 4 years old, and I was in the movie theater. And when Ariel reached out and singing the song, Part of Your World, she said, I stood up in the middle of the movie theater, and I reached my hands out to take her hands because she wanted to be part of my world. I was like, thank you, I could kiss you. This is what you want. You want to connect. You want to touch the audience and have them believe, like you do, in the character.
And I think he's certainly succeeded in that. That was the Disney animator Glen Keane speaking with Emma Nelson on Monocle in Paris earlier. And that's a wrap for that particular daily show from the Olympics, but you can download our special coverage on our website or check out 2 more shows live from this weekend from Paris, Monocle on Saturday and Monocle on Sunday. That is, however, all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Chris Chermak, and our researchers were Gunnar Gronlid and Sana Jumani, and our studio manager was Lily Austin. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Guy Delaunay. Have a good weekend, and thanks for listening.